First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America is extremely important in the history of humanity, not only the history of the United States. The First Amendment is something unique and precious. We think, well, everybody in the West certainly has freedom of speech today. Well, as an old Gershwin tune would say, it ain't necessarily so. But what is the First Amendment of the United States? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I'd like to start with the last part first. The right to peacefully assemble, to get together, and to present to the government what the people think is wrong and needs adjusting. Now, that doesn't mean when something goes wrong in government, a decision is made that upsets people, that there's a right to riot, to destroy. No. To peacefully assemble. A big, big part of the First Amendment. And I would like to think of the Right to Life March every year that happens in January around the anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision, when hundreds of thousands of people will march peacefully, listen to speeches, present their arguments on why the unborn need to have some protection in the United States of America. After the march is over, everything is perfectly clean, there is no litter, no debris, and there is an orderly dispersing of people. That's guaranteed in the First Amendment, the right to peacefully assemble to present grievances to the government. And then there is the middle section of this First Amendment, the right of having freedom of the press and free speech. We might say, well, Canada, England, other countries have that right. Well, partially so. I remember in the middle of the 1990s, when I was stationed in Buffalo, New York, there was a terrible serial murder trial. A married couple killed several people, torturing them horribly. After their arrest, a judge ordered the entire country to be silent on this trial. No one in the press, the radio, television could report on it. In the call-in radio shows, they'd have the 7-second dump. A caller could not call and make an observation or ask a question. The end result was everybody was listening to radio from the United States and television stations from the United States to get the news on what was happening at the trial, because the United States has freedom of the press, freedom of speech, in a way that Canada does not. And the same is true in England. A judge can prevent the media from reporting on an active trial in order to prevent a poisoning of the jury pool. But there are many other restrictions by law and by custom that prevents people to have the same liberty to propose controversial ideas that we have in the United States. However, if you look at the Sedition Act of 1917, you could see how in times of national emergency, the government and the politicians would try to restrict freedom of speech and freedom of the press. It's something to look into and realize this constitutional amendment has to be defended and needs to be supported by the people of God who are informed on what's actually in that amendment. And now we come to the first part of the First Amendment, the freedom of religion. It, of course, is particularly important to me as a Catholic priest. Up until the American Revolution, it was just assumed that all nations would have an established religion, so that the religion and state could work hand in hand for the benefit of the people and the stability of the nation. Of course, there was a downside to this. What do you do with heretics, people that dissent from the established religion? And the state would intervene with imprisonments or executions because they had to defend the established religion. And the founding fathers of the church realized the evil and dangers of that. Now, before the Revolution, each of the colonies more or less had their own established religion. Down south, it would be the Episcopal Church. And in New England, more or less, the community church would have official endorsement. Down south, the Presbyterians objected to the fact that there was a tax gathered to support the Episcopal Church. Now, the Episcopal Church would be the givers of charity to those in need. They provided the social services to the weak, the poor, the hungry. The Presbyterians didn't object to that, but this tax would also pay for the Episcopal priest and the support of his family. That they objected to. And on it would go. Whenever you have an established religion, there's going to be complications. So in the Constitutional Convention of the United States during the Revolution and the forming of this new nation, what to do with religion? They realized the important role religion played in keeping the common wheel of society going. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery. All of those things made sense. But what do you do in this new nation? Some proposed to have Christianity as the official religion, without defining which type of Christianity. One of the debaters said, if we don't have that, one day a papist might be president of the United States, or a Muslim, as they would call the Muslims in those days. And the founding fathers had to say, yes, we're willing to take that risk. Now, anti-Catholicism during the founding years of the nation was quite severe. John Jay, who would become the first Supreme Court Chief Justice, when he was a legislator in New York during the Revolution, proposed a law that would say Catholics could not run for or hold public office or own property. Why? Because they were suspected of being loyal to a nation other than the United States. Well, John Carroll from Maryland said, are you crazy? The Revolutionary Army is bursting with Catholics, and we need the support of France, a Catholic country, if we are to have any hope of defeating the British. So the law was defeated in New York. I believe the count was like 18 against the law and 14 for the law. Later, of course, John Jay, once he had to make judgment according to the Constitution, would set aside his fears about Catholicism. But how to put that in the First Amendment, how to word that. When the first Congress got together, it bounced back and forth between Senate and Congress, Senate and Congress. No one could agree on how to word the First Amendment. So finally they had a group of men, Oliver Ellsworth from Connecticut, James Madison from Virginia, John Carroll from Maryland, Roger Sherman from Connecticut. They got together, and overnight they hammered out the wording of this precious amendment to the Constitution. When it was read in Congress and before the Senate, everybody agreed this is what they were trying to say. Now, it was a protection not so much of the state against the church as a protection of the churches against the intervention of the state into their lives and into their practices and into their beliefs. It would take time for this to seep into the consciousness of the various local communities. In New England, they continued to collect a tax to support the community church. And when the Baptists objected, they said, well, all you have to do is fill out a form and you'll be exempt from this tax. But there would never be any forms available to get that exemption. So they wrote to Jefferson, and he wrote the letter in support of the Baptists, saying there should be a wall established between church and state. A wall that was frequently quoted during certain points in contemporary history, but quickly forgotten about when politicians realized, hey, we could interfere with the life and the belief of the church by passing certain laws, bring them in line with our thinking. So there was another letter written by Jefferson. When we purchased from France the Louisiana Purchase, there was a group of nuns with orphanages in New Orleans, and they were wondering, in the United States, will we be able to run our orphanages? Will we be able to continue our religious practices as we had under France? And Jefferson said, dear sisters, don't worry about it. We have a First Amendment which guarantees we will never interfere with the good works you are doing. Well, unfortunately, the state has been interfering a lot. But we have to pray that the First Amendment will remain vibrant in this nation of ours. Now, there is a problem with the freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Early on, pundits realized we have freedom of the press if we own a press. And it is more so today. All the media outlets are basically only owned by about 5 major corporations. And so the news we get is somewhat limited. We pray that the journalists will realize their awesome responsibilities, keep the editorializing to their opinion pages, and keep the reporting of what's going on as factual as possible. We also pray that a greater variety of news is reported. I read the newspapers, watch the cable programs, and every day they all repeat the same 3 or 4 news items from slightly different perspectives. I wonder today, we'll not have a single report from India, the world's largest democracy. Or we might have a single report from the People's Republic of China. We don't hear anything about the 2 largest nations of the world unless something catastrophic happens. Couldn't the world news at least inform us a little bit about what's going on? It is just a thought and just a prayer. But let's be thankful as citizens of the United States that we have a First Amendment, and that First Amendment is exercised well. God bless each and every one of you.